January 6, 1921, Los Angeles. Grauman's Egyptian Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. Searchlights swept the sky. Women arrived in furs and diamonds. Men in tuxedos. The usual Hollywood premiere spectacle. Everyone who was anyone showed up to see what Charlie Chaplin had been doing for the past 2 years, an obsessive perfectionist, slightly unhinged isolation. The Kid, his first feature-length film, 53 minutes long, which doesn't sound like much now, but in 1921, when most comedies were 10-minute shorts where someone got hit with a board, this was basically Gone with the Wind, an epic, a gamble, an insane amount of money spent on a story about a homeless man and an abandoned baby. Charlie sat in the back. He couldn't just sit front row like a normal person. He had to lurk in the shadows, watching, judging himself more harshly than any critic ever could. This film wasn't just a movie. It was therapy, grief counseling, a very expensive way to process trauma. His son had died 18 months earlier, 3 days old, and instead of going to an actual therapist, well, Charlie made a movie about it. The lights dimmed, the film started, and there was the tramp, finding a baby in an alley, deciding to keep it, raising it, loving it. All the things Charlie didn't get to do with his own son. All the things he wished he could have done. Projected onto celluloid, performed for strangers, shared with the world. Settle in, get comfortable, because we're about to take a journey back to 1919, to a man who had everything and nothing, fame and loneliness, success and grief, who turned his worst nightmare into his greatest masterpiece. But first, we need to go back further, to London, to poverty, to the kind of childhood that makes you either a serial killer or a genius comedian. Charlie went the comedian route, thankfully. Chapter 1. The Real Kid. London. 1889. Walworth, the slums, where the buildings leaned into each other like drunks, where the air was 50% coal smoke and 50% despair, where having both your parents was a luxury and having dinner was a miracle. Charlie was born there on April 16th to Hannah Chaplin, a music hall performer, a single mother, and the owner of a voice that was slowly giving up on her. Her mind would eventually do the same. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., existed somewhere, probably drunk, definitely not paying child support, because child support wasn't really a thing yet. You could just leave, have kids, and walk away. And Victorian society shrugged and said, "Good luck, lady." Hannah did her best, which wasn't great, but also wasn't entirely her fault. She was a single mother in Victorian London. The deck was stacked against her. The game was rigged. She sang when she could, sewed when she couldn't, sold things when she was desperate. They moved constantly, always 1 step ahead of the landlord, 2 steps behind where they needed to be. Charlie and his older brother Sidney shared everything, a bed, clothes, whatever food there was, which was often nothing. They got good at being hungry. You'd think you couldn't get good at that, but you can. Your body adjusts, your expectations lower, you stop thinking about food, mostly. Well, you think about it constantly, but quietly. When Charlie was 5, something happened that would change everything. Hannah was performing at a military music hall, singing for soldiers who were drunk, rowdy, and unforgiving. Her voice cracked mid-song. The crowd turned, started booing, throwing things, coins, food, the usual encouragements. The stage manager panicked, grabbed 5-year-old Charlie from the wings, and shoved him on stage. "Do something," he said. "Anything. Make them stop throwing things." And Charlie, this tiny starving child, started singing, started performing. He made the drunk soldiers laugh, made them throw coins. Real money, for him, for his performance. Backstage, Hannah gave him the coins, told him he'd earned them, and Charlie's brain made a connection. Performance equals money. Funny equals survival. Entertain people and they feed you. It was Pavlovian, except instead of a bell, It was crippling childhood poverty, and instead of a dog, it was a future genius. This would have been a perfect origin story if Hannah could have kept it together, but she couldn't. Her voice was gone. Her mind was going. By the time Charlie was 7, she was committed to an asylum, Cane Hill, a Victorian mental institution, which was exactly as terrible as it sounds. They called it treatment. It was more like storage for inconvenient people. Women who couldn't cope. Women who'd been broken by poverty and loss and a world that gave them nothing and expected everything. Charlie and Sydney were sent to the Lambeth workhouse, a Dickensian nightmare with literal Dickens-era conditions. Rows of cots, thin gruel, child labor, beatings, the whole orphanage special designed to make poverty so miserable you'd do anything to escape it. Charlie was there for months. Then Hannah would recover briefly, get released, and take the boys back. They'd have a few weeks of almost normal, then she'd relapse, back to the asylum. Boys back to the workhouse, on and off, back and forth. Stability was a rumor. Home was temporary. Love was conditional on sanity, on money, on things they couldn't control. This happened repeatedly throughout Charlie's childhood. It was like the world's worst carousel. He couldn't get off, just kept going round and round, getting dizzier, getting harder, getting whatever the opposite of childhood is. By 9, he'd learned some things. Adults couldn't be trusted. Systems didn't care. Nobody was coming to save him. If he wanted to survive, he had to save himself. Performance was power. Making people laugh meant eating. Being funny was better than being forgotten. These aren't great lessons for a child, but they're useful ones if survival is your goal. At 14, he joined a theater company and started performing professionally. Comedy, slapstick, physical humor, the kind that transcends language and works anywhere. He was good, natural. He had that thing you can't teach. Timing, presence, the ability to find funny and awful, to make people laugh at terrible things, which was basically his entire childhood. By his 20s, he was touring America with the Fred Carno troupe when he got spotted by Max Sennett. Hollywood, movies, a new medium, a new world, a way out. After 20-plus years of poverty and workhouses and madness, a door finally opened, and Charlie walked through it, ran through it. He created the Tramp. This character, this icon. A homeless man, poor and shabby but dignified, resilient, kind, always getting knocked down, always getting up, always surviving with grace, with humor, with a very large mustache. It was Charlie, obviously. His entire childhood compressed, transformed, made palatable, made funny, made into something people would pay to watch instead of cross the street to avoid. By 1918, Charlie Chaplin was the most famous person on Earth, making ridiculous money, living in a mansion. The American dream. The rags to riches story. The immigrant who made good. Except he couldn't shake the rags part. Couldn't forget where he came from. Couldn't quite believe this was real, that it wouldn't all disappear, that he wouldn't wake up back in the workhouse. Success didn't fix the past, didn't erase the trauma, didn't make him whole. It just made him rich and broken instead of poor and broken, which was better, obviously, but still broken. Chapter 2. Mildred and Norman. In 1918, Charlie made a mistake. He married Mildred Harris. She was 16. He was 29, which today would get you arrested, but in 1918, Hollywood just shrugged and said, "You do you." She said she was pregnant. It turned out to be false or a lie, depending on who you believe. But they were already married by the time they figured that out. They were trapped, both of them, in a marriage neither wanted, based on a pregnancy that didn't exist. They had nothing in common. Mildred was a child, literally, playing with dolls, going to parties, being 16. Charlie was a workaholic genius with crippling abandonment issues and a pathological need for control. It was a match made in hell. The marriage was doomed from the start. Everyone knew it, but they tried, sort of. Charlie worked constantly. Mildred complained constantly. They fought, coexisted, and waited for it to end. Then, in 1919, Mildred actually got pregnant. For real this time. Charlie was terrified, excited, confused. He didn't love Mildred, but a baby. His baby. This was a chance to be the father he never had. To give this child everything. To do it right. To break the cycle. July 7th, 1919. The baby was born. A boy. Norman Spencer Chaplin. Beautiful. Perfect. 7 pounds of possibility. Charlie held him and felt something crack open inside. This was it. This was his chance to be better, to create something good, to love someone unconditionally, to have a family. Finally. Norman lived 3 days. He was born with malformed organs, heart, lungs, everything wrong, everything unfixable. He died on July 10th, 3 days old. He never really woke up. Never knew his father. Never had a chance. Charlie shattered completely. He'd survived poverty, abandonment, starvation, workhouses, his mother's madness, everything but this. Losing his son, his 3-day-old son, his chance to be a real father, to have a real family, to do it right. This broke him. Actually broke him into pieces he didn't know how to put back together. Mildred grieved too, but differently. She wanted to move on, to forget, to pretend it didn't happen. That was her coping mechanism. Denial. Charlie couldn't do that. Norman existed, was real, mattered. 3 days of life still count. Still means something. Have to mean something, or what's the point of anything? The marriage ended. What little foundation it had was gone. They divorced in 1920, fought publicly, made it ugly. The press loved it. The scandal, the young wife, the famous husband, the dead baby. Entertainment gold for everyone except the people actually living it. And Charlie did what Charlie always did. He worked, performed, created. He took his grief and made something from it. Because that's what you do when you don't have therapists. You make art. You process trauma publicly. You turn your dead son into a movie and hope that helps somehow. Chapter 3. The film. Charlie had started filming the kid before Norman was born, back in 1918. It was supposed to be a short 20 minutes long. The tramp finds a baby, raises it. Funny stuff happens. Simple. Sweet. Easy. But after Norman died, Charlie kept filming. Kept adding scenes. Kept going deeper. Kept pouring everything into this story, this film, this child who wasn't his child, but was also somehow every child, including him, including Norman, including all the abandoned kids who ever existed. It became a feature. 53 minutes, his first. A full story. A real film about a man and a boy who aren't related, who find each other, who become family, who love each other, who save each other. It was wish fulfillment. Fantasy. The childhood Charlie wanted. The fatherhood he lost. All of it on screen for the world to see. He found Jackie Coogan, 5 years old with huge eyes and a natural gift for performing. He could act, could do comedy, could cry on cue. Perfect. Charlie taught him everything. How to move, how to react, how to make the camera love you. Jackie absorbed it all like a tiny comedic sponge. Charlie was obsessive, perfectionist. He would do 50 takes of a single shot, 100, until it was exactly right, exactly what he saw in his head. His crew thought he was insane, wasting time, wasting money. But Charlie didn't care. This film mattered, was everything. Had to be perfect, had to work, had to mean something. Or Norman died for nothing, and that was unacceptable. The famous scene where the orphanage takes the kid away, where the tramp fights them, climbs roofs, chases the truck, gets the boy back. Charlie filmed that a month after Norman died. He was crying, really crying, between takes, during takes. crew saw it and understood. This wasn't acting. This was real. This was Charlie losing his son over and over. Every take, reliving it, processing it, surviving it the only way he knew how. It might have been healthy in some twisted way, or deeply unhealthy. Hard to say, but it made a great film. They filmed breakfast scenes, the tramp making food for the kid, domestic bliss, fatherhood, the life Charlie wanted, the life he lost. All of it in 2 minutes of film that took a week to shoot because Charlie had to get it perfect. There was the window-breaking scam. The kid would break windows. The tramp would happen by with glass to fix them. Would get paid. It was a con, but also survival, the kind of hustle Charlie knew from childhood. Working the system, finding angles, doing what you had to do to eat, to live. It was funny. Also kind of sad. Also very true to how the world actually works for poor people. The shoot was chaos. Controlled chaos. Charlie's favorite kind. He'd arrive at the studio at dawn before anyone else. Walk the empty soundstage. Planning. Visualizing. Obsessing. The crew learned to just let him be. Let him pace. Let him work through whatever he was working through. Grief, probably. But also perfectionism and control issues and the general neurosis of being Charlie Chaplin. Jackie Coogan would arrive with his father around 8, already in costume, ready to work. Charlie would explain the scene, demonstrate the movements, show Jackie exactly what he wanted, how to stand, how to move, how to react. Jackie was 5'6" eventually, but he understood, could take direction, could deliver what Charlie needed. The crew watched this day after day, month after month. Charlie obsessing over details nobody else could see. The angle of Jackie's head, the timing of a gesture, the exact moment of a reaction. He'd do 20 takes, 30, 50, until something clicked. And then he'd move on to the next shot, the next scene, the next obsession. They thought he was crazy, most of them. Wasting time, wasting money, wasting film. But they also saw what he was creating between the takes, in the editing. Something special. Something that justified the madness. The film took 2 years, 1918 to 1920. Filming, reshooting, editing. Charlie did everything himself. Directed, produced, wrote, starred, edited, composed the music, all of it. Total control. Which was probably about controlling something, anything, when his actual life was so out of control. When he couldn't save his son, couldn't save his marriage, couldn't fix anything real, but he could control this film, this story. So he did. Obsessively. He edited alone in a small room with a moviola, cutting film by hand, splicing scenes together, finding the rhythm, the pacing, the emotional beats. This is where the magic happened. Taking hundreds of hours of footage and finding the story. The truth. He cut beautiful scenes, funny scenes, scenes that worked but didn't serve the larger story. Killing your darlings, they call it. Charlie killed a lot of darlings, made the film tighter, better, more focused, more devastating. He added title cards because silent films needed them. Words to explain what was happening, what people were saying. Charlie hated them, thought cinema should be purely visual, but he used them when necessary, kept them brief, simple, letting the images do the work. By the end of 1920, the film was done. 53 minutes of comedy and heartbreak, of a man and a child, of love and loss and survival, of everything Charlie felt but couldn't say. Everything he'd lived but couldn't articulate. All of it in this film. Ready to show the world. Chapter 4. The premiere. Back to January 6th, 1921. The premiere. The lights went down, the film began, and the audience, those wealthy, jaded, seen-everything Hollywood types, they laughed. Really laughed. At the physical comedy, the slapstick, the tramp's antics, the kids' expressions, all of it. Genuine laughter. But they also cried. Actually cried at the tender moments. The tramp caring for the kid. The separation scene. The reunion. It wasn't just funny. It was real. Human. True. They could feel it. The love. The loss. The desperate need to protect. To save. To not let the system win. To not let the child be alone. When the film ended, there was silence for a long moment. Then applause. Standing ovation. People weren't just clapping. They were moved. Changed. They'd experienced something, not just watched a movie, but felt something real. Something true. Something that would stay with them. The critics agreed. The New York Times called it a masterpiece. Variety said it was Chaplin at his best. Everyone praised the blend of comedy and drama, the heart, the humanity, the perfect balance of laughs and tears. It was everything Charlie had hoped for and more. The film made millions, was a massive box office success, played for months, years, became a phenomenon, confirmed Charlie as more than a comedian, as an artist, a filmmaker, a genius, someone who understood human nature, who could make you feel things, who could change cinema itself. But Charlie sat in that theater watching the audience's reaction, feeling pride, yes, and relief, absolutely, but also emptiness. Norman was still dead. The film hadn't brought him back, hadn't fixed anything, hadn't healed the wound. It just existed. This thing he'd made from grief that other people now owned, interpreted, took from him, made their own. That's the thing about art. You make it from your pain, your truth, your most private moments, and then you have to share it. Let strangers consume it, judge it, take whatever they want from it, and you can't control that. Can't dictate what it means to them. It's yours, but also not yours anymore. It belongs to everyone. Charlie went home that night to his mansion, his success, his fame, his money, all the things he'd worked for, all the things that were supposed to make him happy. And he was happy, sort of. The film was a success. His career was secure. He'd proven himself, achieved something real. But Norman was still gone. His marriage was still over. His childhood still haunted him. Success didn't fix those things, didn't make them go away. They just existed alongside the triumph, the tragedy and the victory, both true, both real, both permanent. Chapter 5. What came after? Jackie Coogan became huge, the most famous child actor in the world. He made film after film, earned millions, actual millions, for a child. In the 1920s, he was set, rich, secure, his future guaranteed, and then his parents stole it all. They took the money, all of it, and spent it on themselves, on houses and cars and parties and everything except saving it for their child, the one who earned it. By the time Jackie turned 21, legally entitled to his earnings, it was gone, every penny. You'd think there'd be laws against that. Surely someone thought, hey, maybe parents shouldn't be able to rob their children. But no, not yet. Parents could just take their children's money. Completely legal, completely devastating, completely common. Jackie wasn't even the first child star to be robbed by his parents, just the most famous and the most willing to fight back. So he sued them, his own parents, dragged them to court, made it public, made sure everyone knew what they'd done. He won, sort of. Got about $20,000 out of millions. Better than nothing, but not much better. Certainly not justice. But it got attention, made headlines, made people angry, made legislators realize that children need protection, even from their own parents, especially from their own parents sometimes. The Coogan Law, California Child Actors Bill, passed in 1939, required that 15% of a child actor's earnings be placed in a blocked trust, untouchable by parents, protected until the child turned 18. Not perfect, not enough, but something. Better than nothing. Better than what Jackie got. That law still exists, still protects children. Thousands of them who came after Jackie, who got to keep at least some of their money, some of their earnings, some of their future. Because one exploited child fought back, made noise, made it public. And the system, for once, actually listened, actually changed, actually did something right. That's legacy. That's real impact. Not just making a good movie, but actually changing laws, actually protecting children, actually making the world slightly less terrible. That came from the kid, from Jackie's story, from Charlie's film inspiring a kid who grew up and fought back and changed things. Charlie made more films, obviously. He couldn't stop. Work was his therapy, his escape, his everything. City Lights in 1931. A silent film when everyone else had moved to talkies because Charlie was stubborn, believed in the purity of silent cinema, the universality of it. No language barriers, no dialogue to age, just images and emotion and music. It was beautiful. It was anachronistic. It was Charlie. Modern times in 1936, still mostly silent, still defying trends, still doing it his way. About industrialization, about workers being treated like machines, about the dehumanization of modern life. It was political, it was personal, it was angry. But also funny because Charlie couldn't help being funny even when he was furious. The Great Dictator in 1940, his first true talkie, mocking Hitler at the height of Hitler's power, when America hadn't entered the war yet, when many Americans were still isolationist, still didn't want to get involved. Charlie made a comedy about fascism, about tyranny, about hatred, and ended it with a 6-minute speech, breaking the fourth wall, speaking directly to the audience, pleading for humanity, for kindness, for hope. It was brave. It was dangerous. It could have ended his career. Instead, it became his biggest commercial success. But he always said the kid was his favorite, the one that meant the most, the one that was most personal, most true, most him. Not because it was technically better. The later films were more sophisticated, more ambitious. But the kid was pure, was honest. Was grief transformed into art? Was Norman. Always Norman. Forever. He had more children eventually, 8 of them with Una O'Neill, who he married when he was 54 and she was 18. They were happy. 34 years together, 8 kids, a real family, a real home. The thing he'd always wanted, the thing Norman's death had taken from him. He got it back, kind of, eventually. The marriage to Una was different from all the others. She understood him, accepted him, didn't try to change him or fix him or make him into something he wasn't. She let him be Charlie, all of him, the genius and the neurotic, the artist and the damaged child, all of it. And he loved her for it, in a way he'd never loved anyone. It was too late for Norman, but not too late for Charlie to finally have what he'd always needed. Their children grew up normal, relatively speaking. No workhouses, no poverty, no abandonment. Charlie made sure of that. He was overprotective, maybe, hovering, anxious, always worried something would happen. But who could blame him? After his childhood, after Norman, of course he was terrified. Of course he held on too tight. But his kids grew up loved, safe, secure. That counted for something. He lived until 1977, 88 years old, long enough to see silent films become obsolete, talkies take over, color replace black and white, the studio system collapse. Everything changed. But the kid remained relevant, remained powerful, remained true. Norman Spencer Chaplin, born July 7th, 1919, died July 10th, 1919, 3 days. But from those 3 days, from that loss, from that unbearable grief, came this film, this masterpiece, this thing that's been watched by hundreds of millions of people, that's made them laugh and cry, that's changed cinema, that's inspired laws, that's mattered for 100 years and counting. That's not immortality for Norman, but it's something. It's more than most people get. 3 days of life, a century of impact. And that's where we'll leave him. Charlie Chaplin, January 6, 1921, sitting in the back of that theater, watching his masterpiece, knowing he'd succeeded, knowing he'd created something that would last, but also knowing it didn't bring Norman back, didn't fix anything, just transformed it, made grief into art, pain into comedy, loss into something millions of people would watch and maybe feel less alone. The Kid changed cinema. Before it, feature comedies were risky, unproven. Studios thought audiences wouldn't sit through an hour of funny. That comedy only worked in short bursts. Charlie proved them wrong. He showed that comedy could have depth, could have heart, could make you feel while making you laugh, could be both hilarious and heartbreaking, often in the same scene. His technique was revolutionary. The way he used close-ups to show emotion, the way he timed physical comedy to the exact split second, the way he built scenes that were funny on the surface but devastating underneath. Other directors studied his work, tried to learn his secrets, but you can't really teach instinct. You can't teach what comes from surviving a workhouse and turning that pain into perfect comedic timing. The Kid influenced more than just comedy. It changed how all filmmakers thought about pacing, about emotion, about the relationship between image and music. Charlie composed the score himself years later for the re-release, and it fit perfectly because he understood that music wasn't decoration. It was part of the storytelling, part of the emotion, part of the whole. Directors from all genres studied the Kid because what Charlie understood about tension, about release, about making an audience care, that applies to everything. That's universal. That's harder than it looks. Most comedies try it and fail. They're either funny with no depth or deep with no laughs. Charlie found the balance and made it seem easy because he was living it. The joke and the tragedy mixed together, inseparable. That was his whole life, his whole childhood, his whole existence. Funny and sad at the same time, always. Every filmmaker after who tried to blend comedy and drama, who wanted emotional depth in funny movies, who understood that life is both things at once, they owe something to the Kid. Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, later Preston Sturges, Billy Wilder, Woody Allen, the Coen brothers, Wes Anderson, anyone who makes you laugh and then sucker punches you with feeling. That's Charlie's legacy. He invented the tragicomedy, the laugh cry, the thing that hurts but also heals. The message of the Kid resonates differently now than it did in 1921, but it still resonates. Family is chosen. Love transcends biology. We're responsible for each other. Not just blood relatives, but everyone. All the lost kids. All the abandoned people. All the ones the system failed. We have to choose each other, save each other, be family to each other. Because nobody else will. That landed in 1921. Still lands today, maybe more than ever, when systems keep failing, when children keep being abandoned, when people keep being alone. We need that reminder that you can find family anywhere, create love from nothing, save someone just by choosing them, by not walking past, by not looking away, by stopping and helping and caring. That's what the Tramp did. That's what Charlie wanted us to do. The Coogan law is the part most people forget. Jackie Coogan's lawsuit didn't just get him money. It changed legislation, created protections that still exist, that still help kids right now, today. Child actors whose parents can't rob them, can't exploit them, can't take everything. That came from the Kid, from Jackie's pain, from Charlie's story inspiring a kid who grew up and fought back. That's legacy beyond art. That's actually making the world better, slightly, for some people. But it counts. It matters. It lasts. Some films just entertain. Some change how movies are made. But very few actually change the real world, create real laws, protect real children. The Kid did that. That's rare. That's important. That's worth remembering. Charlie lived long enough to see his work become history, become classical, become the thing film students study and critics analyze. He lived through the Hollywood blacklist, was actually exiled from America in 1952 for his political views, for being too leftist, too sympathetic to communism. He didn't return until 1972, when the Academy gave him an honorary Oscar. He walked on stage to the longest standing ovation in Oscar history. 12 minutes. The entire audience on their feet, applauding, weeping, welcoming him home. He was 83 years old. He'd been away for 20 years. But Hollywood remembered, finally forgave him, finally acknowledged what they'd lost when they drove him away. Silent films are hard now. We're not trained for them. We need sound, need dialogue, need everything spelled out. But the kid still works, still lands, still makes people feel, because good art transcends its medium, transcends its era, transcends politics, and exile and everything else. It just works. Forever. Here's the truth about turning trauma into art. It doesn't heal you, doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring back the dead or change the past or make the pain go away. Charlie made the kid, and Norman was still gone, still dead, still 3 days old forever. The film didn't change that. Didn't help Charlie, not really, not in any therapeutic sense. But it did something else. It made meaning from meaninglessness, made beauty from horror, made something that helped other people, millions of them, for 100 years. That's not healing. That's transformation, turning poison into medicine, not for yourself, for everyone else. That's what great artists do. They take their worst moments and make them public, make them art, make them something the rest of us can witness. And somehow that helps. Not them, but us. The audience, the witnesses, the ones carrying our own pain, our own losses, our own impossible grief. We see their art and feel less alone. We understand we can survive this. They did. We can. Maybe. That's the gift. That's the point. That's why it matters. Charlie Chaplin showed us survival through creation, meaning through suffering, legacy through loss. He took everything terrible, poverty, abandonment, madness, death, everything, and made it into something that lasted, that mattered, that changed cinema, changed comedy, changed laws, changed how we see ourselves and each other. Not bad for a kid from the workhouse, a man who lost his son, an immigrant who barely spoke English. He made something that transcended language, transcended borders, transcended time. The tramp, the kid, the films, the laws, the legacy. All of it still here, still mattering, still making people laugh and cry, still showing us how to survive with dignity, with humor, with grace, with whatever we can manage when everything's terrible and nothing makes sense, and all we can do is keep going, keep trying, keep finding the funny even when, especially when, there's nothing funny about it. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's what remains. Not perfection, not happiness, not even success. Just survival with style, with heart, with the understanding that we're all in this together, all struggling, all broken, all trying to make it through. And if we're lucky, if we're talented, if we're desperate enough, we make something from it. Something that helps. Something that lasts. Something that matters. Rest well, Charlie. Rest well, Norman. Rest well, all the lost children who never got their chance. You're remembered. In the films, in the laws, in the laughter and tears, in the legacy that doesn't fade, that doesn't die, that continues forever. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real and honest and human. And that's enough. That's everything.